Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Living Manna Church. I am Pastor Dave Sane, Senior Shepherd at Living Manna Church. You are part of our Wednesday night Bible study, and I am so happy that you decided to spend your Wednesday night with us. We got a great study for you guys tonight. Lots and lots of interesting things to talk about. Before we get into that, let me just mention that we're over 500. Finally, we're over 500 on our subscribers. But if you are not yet subscribed, please subscribe, hit that little bell so that you're notified when we go live. Help us out. It helps out the algorithm. And we're on the rise to 1,000. That's the next goal. But we've got 500, so that's really cool. Thank you guys for all of your support. We've got a whole bunch of things going on. Today is the fourth day of the counting of the Omer. Here we are. We're in the middle of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We got all sorts of things going on. Passover was just a week ago. And here it is, Wednesday night Bible study. We get to eat some manna. Actually, you know what? We just started our Telegram channel. It's called Manna Eaters. If you're not part of it, we invite you to be part of the Manna Eaters. You can go download Telegram from your app store. Or there's also an invitation. Maybe what we'll do is we'll post this out on an announcement. We'll send it out to everybody with the invitation, with the address, so you can just join in. It's where we share recipes because it's the Feast of Unleavened Bread, so everybody's sharing all their recipes, pictures of all their dinners. But it's becoming much more than that. People are sharing testimonies and talking about Yah, and we've got people from all over the place that are joining. So we invite you, if you are not on Telegram, please get Telegram. Check us out. We're called Living Manna Church, and it is called Manna Eaters. But again, we'll send out some information. But so far, it's been a lot of fun checking out all the different recipes and all the different things people are cooking, and of course, all the testimonies. So let's see. With that, I think that's all the commercials for today. We've got a really neat Bible study for today. We're going to talk about some stuff, guys, that I really want you to put your spiritual thinking caps on for, because we're going to talk about things that honestly, I don't think have really been talked about or explored in this way, probably for a long time. So we're going to look at some things and ask that Yah give you wisdom and discernment in all the things that we talk about. Let's open up first with a word of prayer. Father, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that's willing to obey. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, so Bible study for tonight. Here we go. Tonight's study is called, we're in the book of Thessalonians, right? Now, I know we've been doing, we went through 1 Thessalonians, and 2 Thessalonians, I think, is only 3 chapters long, and we haven't actually gotten into 2 Thessalonians yet. But just like we did with 1 Thessalonians, there's a lot of pre-work we've got to do. There's a lot of introductory work that we've got to do, and that's what tonight's going to be. We did it last week, and I threw a whole bunch of scriptures at you guys last week and a whole bunch of prophecies. We're going to slow it down a little bit. We're going to try to concentrate on one specific prophecy for tonight. But these are very important principles that we need to understand before we get into 2 Thessalonians, so that we understand what's actually being discussed, so that we understand what Saul is saying, what the people of Thessalonica are thinking. And so tonight for our study, it's 2 Thessalonians. It's still the introduction, but the subtitle for tonight is called The Nations. The Nations. So here we go, guys. With the nations, there is now. I wanted to share this because I think it's important. I think it's important. It really is an important thing to understand the Hebrew, right? It's an important thing to understand the language, the meaning. There's meaning in every one of the Hebrew letters that have a world of information inside of them, and once you understand them, it certainly opens up thinking and ways of looking at things. And certainly, we found out already, we live in a world where definitely there are translation mistakes in every text. It doesn't matter what the name of the Bible is that you're using, from the best of them to the worst of them. There are translation errors in every single translation that we have today. And I think it's a great study. I think it's a lot of fun when you start to learn about the Hebrew letters and you start to worry about learn about the text and learn about the background. But in all reality, most of us, and by most of us, I probably say probably 90% of us, we're having a hard time understanding English, nonetheless, trying to understand Hebrew. And that's not to say that understanding Hebrew, understanding the original language is not important. It is important. It definitely bears a lot of fruit with it. But I want to emphasize for you guys for tonight that I think the most important thing, even above the translations, and again, I'm not downing the translations by any means. I study them. I get into it. I get into the Hebrew and all the rest of that. You guys have been part of the study for a while. But I think that the most important principle is not the language. And that's not to say the language is minimized. But I think the most important principle is the story. Because even with bad translations, the story that Father has told is visible in every translation. Guys, honestly, it doesn't, now I wouldn't choose this, but whether I use a New World Translation, or I use King James, or I use NIV, or RSV, or the scriptures, or the Hebrew scriptures, honestly, yes, there are differences between them, some really, really important differences. But ultimately, and yes, there are changes. You get into the New World Translation, lots and lots of stuff have been changed. Even in NIV and King James, things have been changed. But even with that, the story that Father has told cannot be changed. And to me, and this is just me, this is just, me personally sharing with you. To me, I don't care what Bible I pick up. Man, I'll pick up a New World Translation and I'll talk to people that are part of JW and I will preach Messiah to them through their own translation, despite all the errors, despite all the stuff that's in there, because it is in there. Now, again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't strive for excellence. We should. But the fact of the matter is, we are the people among the nations. And of course, tonight's study, I think I forgot to say it, tonight's study is called The Nations. It's still part of our introduction, but it's called The Nations. And as people of the nations, we are people of diverse tongues. I mean, I don't know, I think there's 93 nations or 190 nations in the UN. I think there's something like 200. We just did Passover of the nations. There's something like 204 different flags of different nations in our world today. There's a lot of languages. And I'm not sure that the Bible has been translated into every one of those languages. And I'm sure with every language that we translate it into, there are going to be errors. There are going to be things that are missed. Sometimes intentionally, and throughout history, there have been things that are intentional, and some things that are just, they're accidental. They're just part of the translation. If anybody speaks multiple languages, or you've heard maybe this saying before, it gets lost in the translation, right? Because sometimes when you take it from one language to another language, there are just inflections and words and ideas that don't really kind of translate from one language into another. Now, again, I understand it's important to go back to the Hebrew, the Paleo Hebrew, and all the rest of that. And it's exciting stuff, really, really exciting stuff. But most of us, like I said, are having a hard time, at least here in America, just speaking English. And yet, to me, the most important principle is the story, even above the language. The language is important, But even above the language, the story is most important. Now here's a couple of examples. We've gone through this before, so I'm not going to get into this in any great depth, but I want to share this. Language does matter, right? I mean, what is said because in history, there have certainly been times where people have tried to change things to make it seem one way or another based on how they interpret certain words. Here's one we've gone through before. You guys should be absolutely familiar with this. This is Matthew chapter 16 and verse 24. And it says, and this, again, very, very familiar. It says, "Then Yeshua said to his taught ones, 'If anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his stake.'" Now that's the scriptures version, right? But if you look in like King James, NIV, RSV, ESV, and probably like 90% of every other translation there is out there, it will say, instead of take up his stake, it will say take up his cross and follow me. Here's another one, similar verse, actually the exact same verse. This is Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, and verse 34. And it says, "And calling near the crowd with his taught ones, he said to them, 'Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his stake,'" again, the scriptures version, "cross," just about every other version there is, "and follow me." Now, this is important because, we talked about this before. Why would the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who has emphatically told us there should be no symbols that represent who he is, now tell us to take a symbol that absolutely is a symbol of a nation, that is Rome, and not just a symbol of a nation, but is a death symbol. It's a religious symbol of a pagan nation, and then tell us to take that up upon themselves. Now, people who understand Moses, who understand the scripture, would look at that and say, wait, there's something wrong there. But let's just take it for face value as it is. Here is the Hebrew gospel, because here's where language does matter. And here's where, looking into those little things definitely breeds or fosters better understanding. Here's the Hebrew gospel, Matthew 16 and verse 24. Same verse, but listen to how this is translated. It says, "And then Yeshua said to his Talmudim," his disciples, "Whosoever wants to follow after me is obligated that he should give up hope for himself, and that he take up his warp and woof and follow after me." Now, we've talked about this before, but I want you to see where we read in all the other versions, take up their cross. When you go back to the language, it's not cross, it's warp and woof. And like I said, we talked about this before. We've shared this before, so many of you know this. Many of you are familiar with this. However, let's look a little bit deeper. The concept of warp and woof as opposed to cross, because if you say, let us take up our cross, well then, that has a lot of connotations to it in the modern world today, because people look and they'll say, well, take up the cross. We need to bear the cross. We need to have the symbol of the cross. We need to have that, that's with us. He's saying, take up your cross. Again, for those that understand Moses, why would the God of Israel, who says that there should be no symbol that represents him, then tell us to take up a symbol that is of the nations, that is a pagan, that is an actual religious symbol of a pagan people? Even though Messiah dies upon a cross, I get that, no doubt. But would Yah change his word and they say, well, everything I said is not, yes, it was that way, but now you can take up a pagan symbol? There's a problem with that. That word warp and woof, and I didn't go through all the, the Strong's Concordance and giving you guys all the numbers, because we've done this before. You guys can look back at previous studies and get all of this information. But the word warp and woof actually mean a cross stitch. When you weave something together, you've got the stitches that go this way, and then you got the stitches that go this way. And when you see people weave things, that is a warp and a woof. So it's the stitching that is found in linen. And this is important. It's the stitching that's found in linen. It's the stitching that's found in clothing, in the priest's garments. They're all made of linen. It's the stitching that's found in mats. This is going to be really important in just a second. Mats being, what you lay down on the floor, what you put on the floor, and then you, of course, you lay down on. But it is also a reference to the stitching that made up the tents out of Exodus. The tents that people, when they went to Mount Sinai, they lived in tents. Their tents were made of warp and woof. They were linen. They were cross stitched together. So we went from, in the language, the idea of cross stitched to implying something other than cross stitched and putting in the word cross, to take up your cross. Now, those are, admittedly, here's where the language really, really does matter, because Messiah is not saying to take up your cross. He's saying to take up your warp and your woof. John chapter 5. Now, listen to this. This is really, really important. Put on your spiritual thinking caps. We got a lot of revelations to go through tonight. Here's John chapter 5 and verse 5. It says, "And a certain man was there who had a sickness," and this is really important, 38 years. I put it in blue. I'm trying to do a little bit different than red. We've got it in blue there. It says 38 years he was in this. This is the whole thing when they're at the pool of Bethesda. Everybody's waiting for the stirring of the water. And of course, Messiah comes to the guy. Well, here's what it says. "And a certain man was there who had sickness 38 years. And Yeshua said to him, 'Rise.'" The guy says, "Listen, I don't have any." This is the stirring of the water. If the water stirs, the first guy in the water gets healed. That whole thing. I don't have a man to help me bring me into the water. That's the whole story. You guys can read the story for yourselves. Again, we've gone over this before, but this is really interesting. Yeshua says to him, "Rise, take up your bed." Now, it depends on what version you're reading. It may say bed, but believe me, the guy did not have, a queen-size bed, laying out at the pool of Siloam, he didn't have a Craftmatic bed. He had a mat that was woven, a mat that was made up of warps and woofs. So he says, "Rise, take up your mat and walk." And then verse 9 says, "And immediately the man became well." And what did he do? He took up his bed. Again, not a queen size, super comfort, mattress. It's a mat. Have you ever gone to the, to exercise or to the gym or something, a little mat you lay down, except this is made up of warps and woofs. Take up his bed, his mat, and he was walking. And of course, this was the Sabbath day. This is a very, very important scripture. And yes, we can get into the whole warp and woof and what's actually being said, but the story, see, to me, I think the story is even more important than the intricacies of the language. Because I think if you get the story, it'll help you get the intricacies of the language, even if you don't know the language. Even if you're not versed in the language, but if you understand the story, you'll understand kind of what's being said. So here it is. But here's the story, right? It's during this whole event, whether it's, the scriptures we went over prior to, that is Matthew 16, Mark 8. These things take place during tabernacles, right? During the sukkah, during the time of putting up your tent. Now, in that day, putting up your tent was about, yes, it was about linens, but it was about palms and leaving the top open, the whole tabernacles celebration. And it is during this, in Matthew 16, that Peter is the one that says, "You're the Messiah. You are the Son of the living Elohim." The next chapter tells us about the Mount of Transfiguration. They see Messiah with a vision of Elijah and also Moses. And of course, Peter, blurts out, listen, we ought to build, a couple of sukkahs, at least 3 sukkahs, one for Moses, one for Elijah, one for Yeshua. This is on their mind because this is during the season of tabernacles, this idea of picking up a tent. Now, again, here's the Hebrew gospel. One more time, chapter 16, verse 24 of the Gospel of Matthew in the Hebrew Gospels. And then Yeshua said to his Talmudim, whosoever wants to follow after me is obligated that he should give up hope for himself. Now, hold on a second. Go back to the story of the guy at the pool of Siloam, who's totally given up hope for himself. He's like, the water stirs. This is a tradition that's going on in Israel in this day. When the water stirs, you got all these sick and lame and diseased people laying all around the pool. And when we see the water start to bubble up, the first guy in the pool gets healed. Now, whether that's true or not, it's speculation on our part, but that's what they believe. So this guy had given up all hope for himself, right? I don't have a man, he tells Yeshua. I don't have a man that can bring me to the pool. He's lame. He can't walk. He can't use his legs. Whatever the issue is, he can't get to the pool. And of course, Yeshua tells him, get up. And of course, an amazing healing goes on. So once again, Matthew chapter 16, this is where language is important, but the story is equally important to understand what's being said. It says, whosoever wants to follow after me is obligated that he should give up hope for himself. Just like this guy, who, by the way, it tells us was there for 38 years. See, if you don't know the story, you pass right over that 38 years and you're thinking, okay, the guy's there a long time. He's been in a really bad situation for a long time. And of course it says, and that he should take up his warp and woof and follow after me. So here's the story context. So whether you know the language or not, right? Whether you understand the language or not, if you understand the story, then you can imply the language, right? You can imply the truth. Because the story is, when you read in Matthew 16, it's during the season of tabernacles. There's the tabernacle for Moses, the sukkah for Moses, the sukkah for Elijah, the sukkah for Yeshua. Elohim tabernacled with us, as is done in the book of Exodus. Yeshua is going through the story of Exodus, and he's telling them the story is actually about me. Just like following the flame, following the smoke, every time Yeshua says, follow me, he's making a reference to what has happened in the past, to the story. So if you know the story, regardless of your language skills, if you know the story, whatever language you've heard it in, this should sound familiar to you. Of course, he says in the wilderness to pick up your tents, which are also made up of warp and woof. They're linen tents. They're made up of cross stitching, not the cross stitching. Linen tents, and of course, within the story of Exodus, he says to follow me. Now here's again, the story is important because it doesn't matter what language you read it in, the story is the story. Doesn't matter which Bible you read it in, you're going to get this story. And of course, you got to do some digging, you got to do some research. And I'm not going to do all the research tonight. I'm going to let you guys go, track this out and explore this for yourselves. Go do your own Bible study. But here's the amazing thing, that by the time the spies go out and they come back and they get judged that for the next 40 years, they're going to wander through the wilderness. They've actually been in the wilderness 2 years already. And they will be in the wilderness another, here it is, catch it, 38 years. And you can look at, just to give you guys a little bit of a hint so you guys can maybe go check this out yourselves, you can look at Numbers chapter 10, verses 11 and 12, Numbers chapter 20, verses 1 through 5, go to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, where it tells us that by the end of the death of Aaron and of Moses, it has been 40 years since the Exodus, since getting out of Egypt. That's when they bury Aaron, and then they mourn for Moses for 30 days, a total of 40 years. So Yah's incorporating the entire time. So, but actually, if you really, go down to the nitty gritty, it's actually 38 years. Thus, the story. Here's why the story matters. You read this and you're saying, this guy's been laying down. He's been sick. He's been diseased. He can't get into the water in time. I don't have a man. Nobody's there to help me. I've given up hope. For how long? 38 years. It's still a reference to the Exodus, to the wandering in the wilderness. So whether you're taking up your mat, your warp and woof as a mat, or you're taking up your tent, your warp and woof as a linen tent, the intent is the same. The story is the same. It's telling us that Yeshua is the God of the tabernacle, who by fire at night and by smoke during the day, with his tent, his warp and woof, led the people of Yah throughout the entire 40 years, the 2 years prior and the 38 years after. You guys can go and research this stuff, and there's all sorts of good information you guys can find. Go online, Google it, all sorts of stuff out there. I didn't want to do that for tonight because I got some other stuff that I really, really, really want to share with you. But here's just an example of, yes, language matters, warp and woof, but the storyline is the most important thing, because whatever translation, whatever language it gets put into, if you don't know the story, if you don't know the general content of the story, you're going to be lost. But if you know the general content of the story, it begins to make sense. And again, I'm emphasizing tonight that the story, at least in my humble opinion, the story is paramount. Okay, so with that, again, you guys can research this out. You guys can go check out all that stuff. It's really interesting stuff. Again, it's online. You guys can, research all of this. Okay, so here we go. This morning, as part of our morning manna, if you listen to our morning manna, and I hope that you're listening to the morning manna, I talked about Luke chapter 24 and verses 46 and a couple of the other verses. And here's just a portion of it. It says, and he, meaning Yeshua, said to them, thus it has been written. Now, hold on there for a second. I put it in blue. It's highlighted there. Again, the yellow sort of the PDP version. We're going to have some scriptures in yellow too, but it's me adding some scriptures in yellow. But when you see it in another color, especially this highlighted sort of, I don't know what color that is, teal or whatever it is, this is what's written, but I'm highlighting it so that you pay attention to it. It says, thus it has been written. So here we are. We're in the middle of the counting of the Omer, right? We're in the middle of the unleavened bread. Do you ever wonder, what did Yeshua talk to about his disciples during the 40 days after the resurrection? Well, here it is. This is it. Tonight's study is what Yeshua talked about with his disciples. It says, thus it has been written, and so it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and to rise again from the dead on the third day. So he's saying it was written that this should happen. But verse 47 says, and it is also written that repentance and forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. So now the question is, well, now, if we're talking about it is written, right? The master's saying it is written. The Son of Man is going to die 3 days in the ground. And the way he says it, it was necessary for the Messiah to rise again from the dead on the third day. Well, he's talking about Jonah, right? I mean, the most obvious story, and there's other stories that give this information too, but the most obvious one is the story of Jonah. But where is it written that repentance and forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem? So there's a couple of places that we can maybe go to and sort of, look at and say, okay, this could be what he is referring to. Here's Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. And it says, "And Yah said to Abram, go yourself out of your land, from your relatives and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you, and I shall make you a great nation." Now, in yellow there, I got the PDP version. The nation he's talking about is the nation of Israel. "And I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I shall bless those who bless you, and curse him who curses you." And here it is, "and in you," and I put in there in parentheses in yellow because this is, I think, what he's saying, "in you and in the nation that will come from you, all the clans," or all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. So when Yeshua says in Luke 24, "It is written," okay, we can find, Jonah and some other places about 3 days dead and raising up. But here's one place where we can actually find where Yah is explicitly saying to the nations. And actually, if you think about it, the storyline, because the storyline's what's most important here to us, the storyline from what's being said here in Genesis 12 is that from Abram, or Abraham. Remember, Abram means father of nation, exalted father. Abraham means father of nations. From Abram, the nation Israel, all blessing will come through them to the nations, to every nation, every tribe, every people, and every tongue. And by tongue, of course, we mean language. So you think about it today, people in Japan, people in Iraq, people in Spain, people in, all over the world speaking multiple different languages may not understand Hebrew, but the story, the basic translated story, I think even exceeds even the accuracy of the translations. Translations, again, if you've ever spoken another language, you lose something in translation. But Yah's story is never, ever, ever lost. Okay, so where else is this story? Because Yeshua is saying it is written that repentance and remission of sins be preached to the nations. So where else does this occur? Because there can't just be one instance of it. That's impossible. We know that Yah gives multiple testimonies of things. So here is another instance. We've talked about this before, so it might be a little bit of review for people, but we're going to talk about some brand new things, so bear with me. Again, everything in that teal color is just me emphasizing what's going on. But the yellow is scripture, but I'm putting in scripture to emphasize the PDP version to help you understand the story, because the story is the most important aspect of all of this. And the story supersedes every language, every tongue, every nation. It doesn't matter how bad your translation is, you can't get away from this story. Here is Isaiah 66. We're going to start at verse 1, and we're going to go all the way through it, and we're going to read this, bit by bit. So please bear with me. Let's do this. Put on your spiritual thinking caps. Take a deep breath. Let's go through this piece by piece. Isaiah 66 and verse 1. It says, Thus says Yah, the heavens are my throne, and the earth is my footstool. So this is the last chapter of Isaiah, guys, we're reading. Where is the house that you build for me? And where is the place of my rest? And all these my hands have made, and all these that exist, declares Yah. Yet to such a one I look, on him who is poor and is bruised of spirit. So right off the bat, Isaiah is, and if you read go through all the chapters of the rest of Isaiah, he's telling us Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. Temple's going to be destroyed. He starts it in chapter 1 of Isaiah, and this is a continuous theme all the way through Isaiah. Now in chapter 66, we get the culmination of it. And Yah is saying, I own the heavens and the earth. I made everything. Where is this house you said you built for me? Where is it? And all these things that actually my hands made. And look at, it says, and yet to such a one I look, on him who is poor and bruised of spirit. He's telling us there's a problem with the temple, right? There's a problem with the house. Where is this house that you built for me? Here's the people I want to look upon. The people who are poor and bruised of spirit. Here is, and I'm just throwing it out there. This is Matthew, I think, chapter 5. Some of them I put some scriptures to. Some of them just quoted the verses. You guys can look these up yourself. This is where Yeshua says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. So he says, yet to such a one I look. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can maybe see that. He says, yet to such a one I look, on him who is poor and is bruised of spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and who trembles at my word. Verse 3. Now he's talking about the temple, because the temple is the issue of chapter 66. But in the temple, this is how Yah received their offerings, both in the days of Isaiah and in the days of Yeshua. But whoever slays the bull strikes a man. Whoever slaughters the lamb breaks a dog's neck. Whoever brings a grain offering brings pig's blood. Whoever burns incense blesses an idol. He's telling us how Yah is looking at what's going on in the temple. So when they bring a bull for a burnt offering, it's no different as if you punched a guy in the face, which is obviously a bad thing to do, but it's like you punched a guy in the face. If you brought a lamb to the temple, Yah looked at it as though you broke a dog's neck. Remember, a dog is an unclean animal. Now, yes, I love my dog. I love little Maxwell. He's a great dog. He's great to have around. You can have dogs around as long as you don't eat them because they're unclean. But this is what he's saying. When you bring a lamb, it is no different as if you broke a dog's neck and put a dog on my altar, which is an unclean animal, and brought it in as an offering. He goes on to say, whoever brings a grain offering, which is a good thing. You bring your grain. We talked about the grain offering and no leaven and oil and et cetera, et cetera. Make sure you have the salt. We talked about this a week or so ago. He says, when you bring a grain, those that bring a grain offering, you guys are so far away from me that when you bring a grain offering, it's no different than if you brought pig's blood. Whoa. Think about that for a second. This is not a good chapter already. Just starting off, this is not a good chapter. Whoever burns incense blesses an idol. Here's, again, just put in parentheses, just to emphasize it, it says, indeed, they have chosen their own ways. And their being, he's talking about the people running the show, the priests, the Pharisees, the scribes, all the people in the temple. Indeed, they have chosen their own ways, and their beings delight in their abominations. This is in Isaiah's day, but also in Yeshua's day. Here is a New Testament reference to it. Revelation chapter 17:4, it says, and her cup was full of her abominations. This is what it's referring to. Verse 4, I shall also choose their punishment. So for what they're doing, the abominations that they are bringing to my temple, what they have made my temple be, even though I want a people who are humble, poor, and bruised of spirit before me, these people are doing this thing, and what I will do is I will choose their punishments. Here's Luke chapter 21, verse 24. These are the days of vengeance, that all things that are written would be fulfilled. This is what this is the story Isaiah is talking about. It says, and bring their fears on them. All the righteous blood spilt will fall upon this generation. All their fears will fall upon that generation. He says in Isaiah, because I called, but no one answered. Here's the story. Messiah came to his own, and his own received him not. That's the story. He says, I spoke in Isaiah 66, and they did not hear. Here's John chapter 8 and verse 43. Because you are not able to listen to my word, you are of your father, the devil, who was a liar and the father of lies. Isaiah goes on to say, and they did evil before my eyes and chose what is displeasing to me. I want you to recognize everything Isaiah is saying is part of the overall story. But we've got to read it as such to understand what the overall, regardless of what language skills you've got, whether you're reading in English or Spanish or German or French, doesn't matter. The story is still here. You can't hide it. He says, those things, what they did before my eyes, they chose what is displeasing to me. Here's the continuation of Isaiah 66. It says, hear the word of Yah, you who tremble at his word, your brothers who hate you, who cast you out for my name's sake. Well, what's the story? John chapter 15, verse 21. All these they will do to you for my name's sake, because they do not know him who sent me. This is what this is the story Isaiah is telling us. It says, for my name's sake, let Yah be glorified. John chapter 17, verse 1, Master says, the hour has come. Now glorify the Son, so that we see your joy. But they are put to shame. The they, Matthew 16:4, are the wicked and adulterous generation that are going to be put to shame. Verse 6 of Isaiah chapter 66 says, a roaring sound from the city. What city? Jerusalem. Jerusalem is what is the topic of Isaiah 66, and the temple. Jerusalem. And a roaring sound from the city, Jerusalem. Here's Matthew chapter 23 and verse 37. Yeshua says, O Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to you. That's what Isaiah is talking about. Isaiah says, a roaring sound from the city, a voice from the Hekel, the temple. Matthew chapter 23 and verse 38. See, your house is left to you desolate. This is what Isaiah is referring to. The voice of Yah repaying his enemies. This is about this whole chapter is about the destruction of Jerusalem, as is laid out in the story of Yeshua. And once you know the overall story, all of this begins to make sense. Verse 7 says, before she labored, meaning Jerusalem, Before she labored, she gave birth. Before labor pains came, so she gave birth before the labor pains, which is, kind of odd, but okay, whatever. So before she labored, she gave birth. Before a pain came to her, she was delivered of a male child. Here is the story. Matthew chapter 1, verse 21. And she gave birth to a son, and you will call his name Salvation, Yeshua. Who has heard the like of this? This is Isaiah 66. Luke 1, verse 27 speaks to Isaiah 66, verse 7. 127 says, to a virgin, betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph. Who has ever heard of a woman who's not been with a man to give birth to a child? This is what Isaiah is saying. This is the story. This is why the story is so important. It says, is a land brought forth in one day? Is a nation born at once? This is Matthew chapter 21, verse 43, speaking to these very words in Isaiah. Therefore, the kingdom will be taken from you and given to another nation now this is me putting in there, in a day, very, very quickly, in a day, which is exactly what Isaiah is saying. It says, for as soon as Zion, in Isaiah 66, for as soon as Zion labored, well, here's Matthew, labor, being labor pains, labor pangs, I think the King James may say. Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 through 8. There's going to be war. There's going to be famine. There's going to be pestilence. There's going to be earthquakes. And he says, these are the beginning of birth pangs. So here's Isaiah talking about for as soon as Zion labored, as soon as she went into birth pangs, it says she gave birth to her children. To what children? Acts chapter 24, verse 14. According to the way, Shaul says, according to the way which they call a sect, we're talking about the Netzarim, which they call a sect, I do worship the Elohim of my fathers. That's the children who were birthed after this birth of a son who comes before labor. Messiah comes before labor, but the Netzarim come after the birth pangs. The next verse says, shall I bring to birth and not give delivery? Says Yah. Shall I who give delivery restrain birth? Says your Elohim. So he says all these birth pangs, something's got to come out of it. That's the story. Story doesn't end there. Here we go. Continuing with Isaiah. Here's verse 10. It says, rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad with her, all you who love her. Rejoice greatly with her, all you who mourn for her, so that you feed, and shall be satisfied with the breast of her comforts, so that you drink deeply, and shall delight yourself in her overflowing esteem. So it's saying Jerusalem's going to bring forth the people who are going to, like a baby, suckle on their mother. Verse 12, for thus says Yah, see, I am extending peace to her like a river. So even though Jerusalem's in trouble, the temple's in trouble, he still brings comfort to Jerusalem. How? Here's John chapter 14, verse 27. My peace I give you, not as the world gives you peace. This is the Messiah's words, fulfilling the story of Isaiah 66. It says, so all of this is for what? The destruction of the temple, because of their abominations, because of all the things that they do. What is this going to produce? Here it is. I put it in blue or teal or whatever color that is there. All of this to do what? And the esteem or the glory of the nations like a flowing stream. What is all of this horror and this destruction and this stuff going to produce? It's going to produce the message to the nations, and it's going to produce the glory of God to the nations. This is the storyline of Isaiah. So out of the destruction of the temple, out of the destruction of the people who are committing an abomination, the glory of the nations will be revealed, or the glory of Yah will be revealed to the nations. Here's Acts chapter 1 and verse 8. You shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem. I forgot to put there Judea, but Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth, which is the nations, the Gentiles. And you shall feed. You shall be carried on the side and be fondled on her knees. Acts chapter 1 and verse 4. Wait in Jerusalem for the promise of the Father. They still had to wait. This is the story. He's telling us a story here. Verse 13. As one whom his mother comforts, so I comfort you. And in Jerusalem you are comforted. John chapter 14, verse 16. And I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter. Verse 14. And you shall see, and your heart shall rejoice, and your bones flourish as tender grass. And the hand of Yah shall be known to his servants. Acts chapter 2, 4. And they were filled with the set-apart spirit. This is the story of what happens in what we call the Gospels. But not only does his hand be known to his servants, here's the last part, and his displeasure to his enemies. Matthew chapter 23, the whole chapter, I just picked out one verse. Woe to you scribes and you Pharisees. Can you see that Isaiah is telling us a story, an actual timeline of events? It goes on. Here is verse 15. It says, for look, Yah comes with fire and with his chariots like a whirlwind to render his displeasure with burning. When? Well, after the comfort, after the sending of the Spirit, after everything that we've read. He's telling us Yah is going to come and destroy with burning, and his rebuke with flames of fire. This is going back to what we just read in the earlier verses to what? To the temple. This is where his displeasure is coming. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 1. Not one stone left upon another. Verse 16 says, for by fire and by his sword he shall judge all flesh in Jerusalem and the house of Israel. That is part of the abomination, doing the things they are not supposed to do. Luke chapter 21 and verse 20. And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its laying waste is near. It says, for by fire and by his sword, Yah shall judge all flesh, and the slain of Yah shall be many. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 28. Wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will be gathered. Those who set themselves apart and cleanse themselves at the gardens after the one in the midst, eating the flesh of pigs and the abomination of the mouse, are snatched away together. He's talking about the people in the temple. He's talking about the priest and the scribes. He's talking about the regular people who are following them. They're doing these things. This is the story. And of course, this comes out in Matthew chapter 23, verse 33. You are serpents and vipers. How will you escape the judgment of Gehenna? Declares Yah. And so because of all of these horrible abominations, because of this terrible judgment that Yah has to put on the temple, he says, and I, because of their works, because of all these abominations, because of eating the flesh of pigs, the abominations of the mouth, snatched away, doing what you want in your own heart, all the stuff that we've read, because of all of that, And I, because of the works of their imaginations, this is what's going to happen. Matthew chapter 8, verses 10 through 11. Truly, I say to you, not even in all Israel have I found such great belief. This is the centurion servant who believes the master, and even though he has to come to his house to heal his servant, he believes. So Messiah says, to the nations, not in all of Israel have I had such great belief. And I say to you that many of the nations shall come from the east and the west and sit down with Abraham and Yitzhak and Yaakov in the kingdom of heaven. But, here's the caveat, but the sons of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. Why? They're the ones committing the abominations within the temple. And there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So let's read the context again. It says, and I, because of their works and their imaginations, am coming to gather all nations and tongues. So think about the storyline. He's saying because of their abominations, because of what they've done in the temple, because they've rejected my word, because of all of these things, that's why I'm now going to choose a group of people from them to now go to the nations. And tongues, different languages. And they, the people of the nations, shall come and see my esteem, or see my glory. Here's verse 19. It says, and I shall set a sign among them. The sign, the ensign he's talking about, is Revelation 19, verse 1. And on his robe and on his thigh. This is not a tattoo. I know I hear some crazy stuff about this. It's not a tattoo. This is a flag. This is an ensign flowing off of his thigh. And on his robe and on his thigh has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, or Sovereign of Sovereigns and Master of Masters. That's the sign. That's the ensign. Yeshua is Master. And shall send, and because of this, because of the destruction that's coming to the temple, because these people have committed abominations, he's going to go to the nations. But how's he going to go to the nations? And shall send some of those who escape. Escape what? Escape the destruction of Jerusalem. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 20. 2 men shall be in a field. 1 shall be taken and the other left. This is not rapture he's talking about. He's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Pray your flight be not in winter. Get out. Some will be taken and get out. Others will not. And shall send some of those who escape. Again, Matthew 24:20. Escape. So those who escape, he shall send them where? To the nations. He's saying those who escape the destruction of Jerusalem, this coming destruction of the temple, this coming destruction of the city, for all the abominations that are doing, those that escape, I'm going to send them to the nations. This is what Yeshua was talking about in Luke 24 when he says, it is written that repentance and remission of sin be preached to the nations. He's referring to this chapter. This is what he spent 40 days teaching his disciples afterward. And of course, he starts to talk about it, Tarshish and Pul and Lud, who draw the bow, and Tubal and Yawan. The coastlands are far off, but basically it comes down to this: to all the nations who have not heard my report, nor seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the nations. Who? The Netzarim, the renewed house of Israel, the people who survived, the ones who were taken out of the destruction of Jerusalem. They will go out and teach the nations. And they shall bring your brothers. Here's Romans chapter 11, verse 25 through 26. For I do not want you to be ignorant of this secret, brothers, lest you should be wise in your own estimation, that hardening in part has come over Israel until the completeness of the nations has come in. And once the completeness of the nations have come in, then the whole house of Israel shall be saved. So when he says, and they shall bring your brothers, he's talking about all, both Jew and Gentile, now together. Who's going to do this? The Netzarim, who escaped the destruction of Jerusalem. As an offering to Yah out of all nations, on horses and in chariots and in litters and on mules and camels, to my set-apart mountain Jerusalem. Galatians chapter 4, verse 26, it says, but the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all, as compared to the Jerusalem below, declares Yah. As the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel. What clean vessels? The people. 2 Corinthians chapter, the nations. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7, and we have this treasure in earthen vessels, so that the excellence and the power might be of Elohim and not of us, to bring these clean vessels into the house of Yah. And from them too, from the remnant, from Israel, from the renewed house of Israel that comes out of the destruction of the temple, from this new nation, he says, I shall take of them for priests. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood. He's speaking to the Jewish people of the first century, and a set-apart nation for Levites, declares Yah. So, so what's the story? So we read through all of this. So let me just summarize the story so we all get it, right? And you listen to the summary, agree with it, disagree with it, whatever. But this is how I see the story. From a promise made to Abram, later to be Abraham, of a coming nation, the house of Israel, that will bless all peoples, all nations, all tongues, will first come terrible abominations that will lead to the destruction and the desolation of the city of Yah and its temple, because it is being run by the devil's children. I know that's harsh. I'm telling you what Yeshua says. Because it is being run by the devil's children, serving the father of lies, bringing forth the great lie, rejecting the written and rejecting the living word of Elohim right in front of them. But despite all of that, there would be a remnant, a small portion of the original nation, a renewed nation, born in a day that will, after the destruction of the city and the temple and the scattering of the people because of their abominations, the message of the promise given to Abraham will go to the nations. The everlasting gospel will go to the nations, to every tribe, every nation, and every tongue. Guys, that is the story as we read it in Isaiah 66. So when Yeshua is saying in Luke 24 that it has been written that remission of sins and repentance be preached to the nations, he's referring to Isaiah 66. One more time, from a promise made to Abraham of a coming nation that will bless a people, all peoples, all nations, all tongues, will first come a terrible abomination that leads to the desolation and the city of Yah and its temple, because it is run by the devil's children, serving the father of lies, rejecting the written and living word of Elohim. But there would still be a remnant. Isaiah says, if God did not have a remnant, we would be like Sodom and Gomorrah, not here anymore. There would be a remnant of the original nation, a renewed nation, born in a day that will, after the destruction of the city, the temple, and the scattering of the people because of their abominations, this message and the promise given to Abraham will go out to the nations, to every tribe, nation, and tongue. And there's a little chart under there. You can see it. Let's understand, this is so important that we get this timeline down, because this stands in the face of every timeline I have ever heard. There must be the destruction and the abomination, the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem and the city. Then the message goes out to the nations to bring them to the mountain called Jerusalem, the renewed Jerusalem, the kingdom. So that's the order. And it's so important. You understand that little bottom thing down there. Let me see if I can, real quick, look at this right here. Look at this right here. I'm putting it in red so you can see it. So what is Isaiah told us comes first? The destruction, the abomination, the temple. Then the message goes out to the nations and brings all of them back in as a clean offering, a vessel unto Yah. That's the order. Here's the order in Isaiah 66. Way before we get into 3.5 years and 7 years and all the rest of that, here's the order. Here's what it tells us needs to be done. This is the order. This is the story Isaiah tells. Okay, so we're not just going to rely on one testimony. We got to have multiple testimonies. That's the way Yah works. So guys, this is going to really blow your minds, because, I've shared some stuff with you guys before, and guys, I'm just going to tell you, say it out there. I was wrong. I was wrong. I was mistaken. I didn't understand, but I understand the story better now. We're going to talk about the 144,000, that from the 144,000 come the nations, that the story we just read in Isaiah is the story of Revelation and the story of the Gospels. First, Messiah comes, the one born of a woman, a nation born in a day. The remnant is born from them. The rest of the nation is judged. The temple is judged. Then goes out to the nations, and the nations are brought in until the end to be a vessel and an offering that is clean before Yah. Here is now when we read about the 144,000, we're talking about Revelation 7 and Revelation 14 are the two places that we read it. And traditionally and historically, what I've said to you guys is I always thought that the 144,000 have to do with those who were resurrected at the time of Messiah, because they are the first fruits, Messiah being born or resurrected on first fruits. But the more you understand the story, a totally different story comes to light. If you understand Isaiah 66, now listen to this. This is Revelation 14. We're going to start Revelation 14 first, and let's go through the story. So I'm just going to read through first. It says, "And I looked, and I saw a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice out of the heaven, like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps, and they sang a renewed song before the throne, and before the 4 living creatures and the elders. And no one was able to learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. They are those who are not defiled with women, for they are maidens," and the word really means virgin, pure. "They are those following the Lamb wherever he leads them. They were redeemed from among men, being," here it is, this is why I always thought, they are the first fruits. Now we think of first fruits as, Messiah is resurrecting and he's bringing the first fruits up to them, but there's another first fruits. It's talked to us about in Leviticus and about in Ezekiel, where you take the lambs and you raise the rod, and 9 of them go to slaughter, but 1 of them, of the 10, becomes the first fruits, a new nation, a renewed nation. This is what Revelation is talking about. So, let's take a look at the same verses. We're going to take a look at it, and I put some PDP stuff in there so we can maybe try to interpret this and understand this a little better. So here's Revelation 14 again, and let's look at it with some additions in it. and see if we can compare the story of what's being said here to the story we just read in Isaiah 66. And I looked, and I saw a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000. This is this. I don't think this is an exact. I think this is a number that represents the renewed house of Israel. I saw 144,000, the renewed house of Israel, another nation, as Matthew 22 tells us, or Matthew 23 tells us, having his father's name written upon their foreheads. This goes back to Ezekiel, I think chapter 9. Another message for another day. And I heard a voice out of heaven, like the voice of many waters and like the voice of thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. And they sang, what do these people sing? They sing a renewed song, a renewed covenant, a renewed message, a renewed house of Israel. The blood of the renewed covenant is what they are singing or saying or telling before the throne and before the four living creatures, the elders. And no one was able to learn that song. Matthew chapter 13, he says the prophets of old wanted to see these things. It was closed to them, but to you has been given the mysteries of the kingdom of God. Eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that is willing to obey. This is why only they can sing the song as opposed to all the prophets who came before them. That song, except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. They are those who were not defiled with women. What women? Jerusalem, the temple, the harlot. They're not part of that Judaistic, Pharisaic, Judaistic thing. Messiah has gotten them out of it. For they are maidens, they are virgin, they are pure in doctrine. They are following what Moses said to do, not what the Pharisees said to do. They are those following the Lamb from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the uttermost parts of the world. Wherever he leads them, they were redeemed from among men, from among the house of Israel, Judah, the harlot in the Middle East. They are the first fruits. 9 are going to get slaughtered. 1 is going to come out. The 1 is the renewed house of Israel. 1 taken, as it tells us in Matthew 24, and another left. 2 in the field, 1 taken, another left. 2 grinding, 1 taken, another left unto the Lamb. This, I believe, is what the 144,000 are really about. It is the story of Isaiah. It's the story of the gospel. It goes on to say in verse 5, and in their mouth was found no falsehood. They have the spirit of truth, not the lie that the Pharisees and Sadducees and the priests had, who were serving the father of lies. They had the spirit of truth, for they are blameless before the throne of Elohim. And I saw another messenger flying in mid-heaven, holding the everlasting good news. That's the gospel given to Abraham, the eternal covenant given to Abraham, but paid for by Yeshua. There's no longer Jew, there's no longer Gentile. We are now all one and children of Abraham. To announce to those dwelling on the earth by the Netzarim, by the 144,000, by the disciples. So the 144,000 is just an overall category. It's a placeholder to refer to the disciples coming out of all of this stuff. Dwelling on the earth And look at what they do, guys. Here's the story of Isaiah 66. These people come out, and what do? They give the good news, the eternal gospel, even to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. Exactly what we just read in Isaiah 66, exactly what Yeshua says in Luke 24, exactly what Yeshua says in Matthew 28, go to the nations, make them disciples. This is the story of the Netzarim. They are the house of Israel, the 144,000. It goes on to say to make disciples of the nations. Verse 7, saying with a loud voice, fear Elohim, give glory to him, because the hour of his judgment has come. What hour of judgment? The judgment we read in Isaiah, the judgment of Jerusalem, the judgment of the temple. And worship him who made heaven and earth, sea and the fountains of water. Just like we read in Isaiah, I made all of this. Where's my house? You guys had to make this. I made this. Verse 8, and another messenger followed, saying, Babel is fallen, that great city. But he's not talking about Babylon. He's talking about the harlot of Babylon, or Jerusalem. So what happens in order for these people to go out and to preach the gospel? Babylon must fall, Jerusalem, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of her wrath. What wine of her wrath? Her misrepresentation of who Yah is. Her religious world that showed Yah to be, well, really what they were doing is they were worshiping Satan. They were worshiping the devil. They were of their father, the devil, as Yeshua says. Her witness and the people in charge of her, their witness was an abomination. And every one of the nations who saw it, who thought that was God, they drank of the wrath of Yah. All nations drink of the wine of her wrath. They lie about Yah. And what's the lie? Here's the lie. This is so important as we get into Thessalonians, because we're going to find out about the lie. What lie did the Pharisees, the scribes, the priests bring forth to the whole world? The lie was, you don't have to believe Yah's word. Believe us, but you don't have to believe Yah's word. You take the traditions of men and you make the word of Yah void. This is the lie. Just like Genesis, this is the lie, and of her whoring. Can you see? And now there's a lot more to this chapter. I'm not going to get into it because, we'll get into it. We'll get into the rest of the story another time. We only got so much time to share all this stuff with you. But can you see, this is the story that we just read in Isaiah. The story is, in fact, that Messiah comes because of all the hardship and the destruction and the abominations of the people that are there. And because of what they've done, the city of Jerusalem will be destroyed. The temple will be destroyed, and a remnant will be taken, and they will be sent out to the nations. This is what, and they are called the renewed house of Israel, another nation. I take the kingdom from you and I give it to another nation. It's the same people, it's the same nation, except they now represent the whole nation. Here is Revelation chapter 7, which is a sister verse to Revelation chapter 14, but it tells us the same exact storyline. Here it is. So here's just a little bit of background so you get this. Chapter 6 is all the birth pangs, war, pestilence, famine, death, the four horsemen, right? War, pestilence, famine, death. Then the fifth seal, the avenging of blood, Matthew 23. Upon this generation will come all the blood from righteous Abel to righteous Zechariah. Then the sixth seal, the great day of the Lamb's wrath. Let the rocks fall on us, the destruction of Jerusalem by Yah. But chapter 7 tells us before all of this occurs, before Yah allows all of that to fall on them, chapter 7, verse 1. And after this, I saw 4 messengers standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow. I lost my place there. That the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any green tree. Before this judgment, before everything we just read of the birth pangs and of the avenger of blood and all that kind of stuff, before that happens, it says a new nation is telling us something else has to happen first. And I saw another messenger coming out from the rising of the sun, holding the seal of the living Elohim. And he cried with a loud voice to the four messengers to whom it was given to harm the earth, to do all the things that he's about, that all the other seals said it's about to happen. And he tells them, do not harm. Don't do it yet. Don't do it yet. Hold up. Wait. Do not harm the earth, nor the sea, nor the trees. These are people. This is Jerusalem. This is what the sea, and it's not talking about fish. It's not talking about trees. It's talking about people. We'll get into this a little bit later. Don't do any of that until we have sealed the servants of our Elohim upon their foreheads. Again, this comes right out of Ezekiel 9. Ezekiel is a parallel book to the book of Revelation. Another study for another day. Verse 4 says, and I heard the number of those who were sealed. So he says, don't do any of this. Don't destroy Jerusalem. Don't let any of that happen until we seal these people. So don't let Jerusalem be destroyed. Don't let the temple be destroyed until we seal these people. This is the history. This is the story. The Netzarim have to be sealed first. Sealed out of, Ezekiel verse 4. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000. Out of all the tribes of the children of Israel. They represent the whole house of Israel. I know it's Judah. I get it. It's Judah. And we make a big deal today out of, well, it's Judah. It's not really Israel. It's not the northern house. No, it is the house of Israel that Messiah came to. They represent the renewed house of Israel, just like the disciples represent and will judge over all 12 of the tribes. They represent the born-again, renewed house of Israel. Forget about tribe issue. And that's why he goes on to say, let me read this. It says they represent the whole house. Here's Matthew chapter 19 and verse 28. And Yeshua said to them, truly I say to you, when the Son of Adam sits on the throne of his glory, you who followed me, this is Peter and James and John saying, listen, we left everything to follow you. He says, you who have followed me, in the rebirth, the resurrection, shall also sit on thrones judging the whole house of Israel, all 12 tribes. Those guys, we don't know if they're all from the whole 12 tribes, but they will judge all 12 tribes because Yah is renewing the house of Israel. And he labels them from verses 5 through 8 as 12,000 from this tribe, 12,000 from that tribe. It's not literally that there's, maybe it is, maybe there are 12,000 from each tribe, but I think this is more of a general statement trying to help us understand a real physical event that's going on, that the Netzarim, the people of the way, they represented that new house of Israel. The kingdom is taken away from the Pharisees, the priests, the scribes, and it is given to another people who will bring forth their fruit, another nation. The other nation is the house of Israel, the renewed house of Israel. This is why Paul says not everyone who is of the house of Israel is the house of Israel. Verse 9 then says, listen to this. So after we go through, I didn't do all the text of 12,000 this, 12,000 that, because it just represents it saying the whole house of Israel is represented here in the Netzarim. Verse 9 then goes on to say, after this, the product of their ministry will be. So you got the 144,000, the Netzarim, who are sealed, who come out of Jerusalem, get out of there before the destruction comes. Pray your flight be not in winter. After this, I looked and I saw a great crowd, which no one was able to count. Where? Out of all the nations and the tribes and peoples and tongues. Starts with who? With exactly who Isaiah 66 said. It starts with the people who escaped the destruction of Jerusalem. They will be sent out to all the nations, and they will bring an offering of all their brethren back as clean vessels. this is what we are reading. Isaiah 67 is also given to us in Matthew 22, verses 7 through 11. But when the king heard, he was wroth, and he sent out his soldiers, destroyed those murderers, Jerusalem, and their city was set on fire, the temple. Then he said to his servants, the wedding feast indeed is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Therefore, go into the street corners, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding feast. And those servants went out to the street corners and gathered all whom they found of all the nations, both wicked and good. When? After the destruction of the temple, after the destruction of the city. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. And when the king came in to view the guest, he saw there was a man who did not have a wedding garment. Well, let's get back to the context of Revelation. I looked and I saw a great crowd, which no one was able to count, out of all the nations, the tribes, the peoples, and the tongues. Go back down to the white, all the way after all the yellow, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, dressed in what? Wedding clothes, white robes, and palm branches in their hands, and crying with a loud voice, saying, deliverance belongs to our Elohim, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. Can you see the story? Can you see the story, guys? This is the same story as Isaiah 66. This is the same story as the story of the apostles work out. See, we're telling everybody it's about a temple that's coming in the future, but every story tells us, no, the temple gets destroyed first. Then the house of Israel gets sent out to do what? To gather the nations. Here's verse 13. I skipped to verses 11 and 12 just for time's sake. It's about the ascending praise, and it's 7 different praises, another study for another day. But here's verse 13. It says, and one of the elders responded, saying to me, here it is, guys, listen to this. Here it is. He responded to me saying, who are these dressed in white robes, and where'd they come from? It started off with the 144,000, the renewed house of Israel, the Netzarim, and now it's every tribe, tongue, nation, and people, language. And where'd they come from? Well, we know where they came from. They came from the nations, according to Isaiah 66, and according to the verses just before this. Verse 14 says, and I said to him, Master, you know. And he said to me, these are those coming out of great distress, great tribulation. The tribulation has endured now for 2,000 years. Not a 7-year, not a 3.5 year, 2,000 years. Guys, if you don't think that we're living in tribulation now, we are on the brink of nuclear war between Ukraine, between Russia, between America. We are on the brink of great tribulation right now. We are coming out of that, and every generation before us has had their great tribulation. And he said to me, these are those coming out of great distress of every nation, tribe, and tongue, as a result of what the Netzarim did, having washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Because of this, they are before the throne of Elohim and serve him day and night in his dwelling place. Isaiah 66, bring them back to the dwelling place. And he who sits on the throne shall spread his tent, his warp and woof, his tent over them. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun strike them, nor any heat, because the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne shall shepherd them and lead them to fountains of waters of life, and Elohim shall wipe away every tear from their eyes. I want you to realize there's 2,000 years between the coming of the 144,000 out of the destruction of Jerusalem, who are marked with the seal of God, to the nations who now stand before Yah. It's been 2,000 years in between. But what comes first? The destruction of Jerusalem comes first. Then the sending of the Netzarim to all of the nations. Then all the nations come in. Then Messiah comes. That is the order of events. That's the story. Let me quickly finish up here. Here's Matthew chapter 24, because we talk about tribulation, we talk about great tribulation. We pass those words around today with 7 years this, 3.5 years this. That's not what they mean. We just read in Revelation that the nations come out of great tribulation from the time of the Netzarim to the time that they stand before the throne. We now know is 2,000 years. 2,000 years of great tribulation, what we are enduring, what we are living through in every generation all around this world. For people who are hearing the truth of who Yah is, we are enduring great tribulation. Matthew chapter 24, verses 4 through 8, the birth pangs. Then they shall deliver you up to affliction, tribulation, the disciples, the new nation, the 144,000 who are marked with the gospel, the first ones to come out of the nation that was destroyed, the nation to be destroyed, and now the renewed nation to go forth to the world. They shall bring you up to affliction, tribulation, and kill you. And you shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many shall stumble, and they shall deliver up one another, and they shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise and lead many astray. And because of the increase of lawlessness, the love of many shall become cold. But he who shall endure to the end of the destruction of Jerusalem, shall be saved. And afterward, like Isaiah 66, after the destruction of Jerusalem, that's when the Netzarim really go out. And afterward, this good news of the kingdom shall be proclaimed in all the world as a witness to who? To all the nations. And then the end, that is Messiah coming, another message for another day, shall come. That's tribulation, and also speaking about the great tribulation of the nations. But here it is, the temple destruction. So for then there shall be great distress, great tribulation after the temple's destruction, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor shall ever be. Whew, lot of information. But let's understand the story. The eternal gospel is given to Abraham. He's told that he's going to have a nation, and that nation will bless all nations. But that nation goes south. They do things they should have never done. They commit abominations that will make them desolate. But out of that nation, he puts the 10 to judgment, but he brings the one, the first fruits, seals them, puts the name of the Father on them, and brings them out of the destruction of Jerusalem to do what? To bring this eternal gospel to the nations. And it's now been 2,000 years that has been going on. What's the next major event to come? Well, that's the rest of Revelation 14, and we'll talk about that another day for another message. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Sorry I went over just a little bit, but this is really, really awesome stuff. This is great stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Listen to it again. Go over it again. Lots and lots and lots of information. This is necessary to understand before we even get into Thessalonians, because this is stuff that was understood by Saul, by Peter, by James, by John. They may not have known the time frames in between, but they knew the story. The story even supersedes the language, because it's apparent in every language. No matter what translation you got, I can find this story. It's not to say language is important. It is. But the story, I think, is paramount to all things. All right. We'll leave it right there, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Don't forget to subscribe if you can. We appreciate that. Be part of our morning manna each morning, really early in the morning. We put out a 5-minute devotion. And then, of course, this weekend for our new series, our new series in Hidden Manna. We look forward to seeing you guys there. Guys, have a great, great night. God bless. And as always, shalom, guys.